Well, guys, welcome. Thank you very much for joining. I hope you find this useful. I've had a lot of requests to do a soldering video, and instead of just doing one and posting it on YouTube, we figured it would be better to go ahead and do it this way so that you can ask questions. So please make sure to make some comments over there. We don't want Miles falling asleep on us anyway. He's going to be moderating the comments and passing them on, because once I get going, I'm not going to be watching the screen. So yeah, make sure to go ahead and ask. I have no problem stopping at any time to answer a question if something is unclear. So first off, for those of you that are interested in animatronics, and I assume most of you are, because that's where we've mainly posted the notifications on those sites, you really need to know how to solder if you're going to do this. If you're going to do anything besides, going and purchasing, and even if you're going to do that, going and purchasing, animated props from Spirit, because we all know how reliable they are and how good the wiring is on them. And so in order to keep them operational for more than half an hour, you're going to need to know this skill anyway. So you really should need to learn how to solder. And it is super simple. I've done classes all over the country. I have never had anybody leave one of my classes and not be able to have a working circuit, soldered circuit that they soldered at the end of half an hour. So, don't be afraid of this. It really is easy if you have the right tools. Like so many of the other things that we do, it's all about the tools. And so we're gonna start with that. We're gonna go through some of the tools I think are necessary. We'll go through a few things that will make your job easier. We're gonna talk about soldering irons. I'm gonna give you the one I think you should buy, and then I'm gonna give you one that you can buy if you're on a super tight budget. So how many of you guys already have soldering irons? Anybody? If you guys post? Yeah. Miles has one for me to use when I go to St. Louis for Transworld.
That's right.
Yeah. Steve, you better know which end of the tool to hold. The first thing that you really need is, and we're going to talk about, you need to have the proper soldering iron, and you need to have the right kind of solder. Those are kind of the two primary things. You get that right, and most of the rest of it will come together. Now, I really recommend that you get a soldering station. And as we go, Miles is going to be posting links to some of the things that I suggest. If you stick around to the end, we'll give you a link to where you can get the whole list of all of those. Word of warning, they are from most of them are from my Amazon link, so my affiliate link. So, it helps keep what we're doing alive if you buy from those links, but you certainly don't have to. But the iron that I would buy if I was just starting out right now is the one that Miles just posted. It's the Heiko 888. It's about $100 on Amazon, and it's the one I would recommend. It was the one that I was planning to buy when I got started, the model that they had at that time, and I wasn't sure if I was going to like this, so I was kind of hesitant to spend $100, and I found a soldering station on sale at Radio Shack that would do to get me started, and I've never had to change. If this one ever goes out, it will definitely be this 888 that I would get. So what you want to do is you want a soldering station because you want to be able to set the temperature, you want an adjustable temperature, and you want to be able to change tips. Those are the two primary things, plus the wattage and everything, but those are two primary things that you want to be able to do. So that's the one I suggest. If you are in a super tight budget and you're not sure if you want to do this after you do it for the first time, there is one. This is the super cheap soldering station that actually gets pretty decent reviews. I happen to own one just for teaching soldering classes. It's the one I travel with if I'm going to do a class, because if I lose it or somebody takes it or whatever happens, I'm only out 25 bucks. So I think it's 18 bucks, and tips are like some extra tips are like 7 bucks. So 25 bucks plus shipping. Under 30 bucks probably you can have one of these. And they do get pretty good reviews. They work pretty well. You can change the tips. You can set the temperature. If you're not sure, you know, that would get you started. So that would be a suggestion. For one, if you want to kind of go off and just play with this a little bit first. And but you really want to be able to swap those tips out, because most of the soldering irons, and I'm going to switch back and forth between cameras, so I'm going to show you again later, but most of the soldering irons come with a very pointy tip, and you would think that that would be the kind of tip that would be the most useful for this. But it really is not what you want. You want a chisel tip. Miles, you want to put me on full screen? That's you. So, you know, you're going to want one that's got a chisel tip, and I'll show you when I get the other screen up. I'm going to be moving again between cameras. So you want to be able to
raise it up a little higher.
Yeah, it's got solder on it, so.
It's fine, it's fine. There you go.
It's got a chisel tip on it. And again, I'll show it when I've got the close-up camera running later. They usually come with a tip like this. That's really pointy. And you would think that that's what you want, but it really isn't. These are pretty useless. Unless you can't physically get into something, or you're doing something with super tiny pads, I wouldn't use these. And we'll talk about that again when we go on. So those are the two things. Get a soldering station. You want a soldering iron, not a soldering gun. You know, the big guns with the trigger things, those are for plumbing. That's not what we want. We want a soldering iron. So I recommend you get a station, adjustable temperature, changeable tips. So that's number one. The other big thing is getting the right solder. And there's a bunch of different solders that you can get, but I just recommend that you remember you get 60/40 rosin core solder. The 6337, it comes lead free, but for most of what we do, 60/40 is what, and you can see how old that is for those of you that recognize Radio Shack. This has long been empty. I just put the big spool. I put a bunch on here every time, so I don't have to hold the 1 pound roll. But you want 60/40. It's a combination of tin and lead. And you want small diameter. Most people are tempted to get the large diameter. The link there is 0.31, I think, which is about as large as I would get, but it's what Amazon has, and it's the quality Kester solder. Getting good solder makes all the difference in the world. So don't cheap out on your solder. So I recommend that you get that. Again, you don't have to get the 1 pound ones. I think these are like 25 bucks or something for a pound. Get the quality solder, get 60/40 rosin core, and we're going to talk about what the rosin core is as we go. So those are the two primary things that you're going to need right off the bat that'll make this a whole lot easier. One other soldering iron just that I kind of wanted to mention. This is a battery powered one. It's the Heiko FX901. And I don't use this as my primary, but there's a lot of times when I'm working out, setting up props, and I have a wire break, and I don't want to lug an extension cord out or have to tear out a controller box and bring it back in here to the lab to be able to fix. This little battery powered soldering iron is really cool, and it works really well for repairs. So, and they're pretty cheap, 25 bucks or 30 bucks. Miles put up a link for that too. But this is something that I find really, really useful for, especially again, when I'm working out in the yard and setting up props and have something go wrong to have one of these. So that's that. Here's the super cheapy soldering iron that I was talking about. And if you decide you want to get one, they were all out of these the other day. They had them this morning. And there's no guarantee. I think I put, it's from Tower Hobbies. Make sure you get the one with the US plug. Again, make sure the US plug, because they have the British one. Don't get that one. But again, you can still replace, unscrew here, take this off, replace the tip. So that's the super cheap one. My Radio Shack one is up here. It's got 3 presets, which is kind of nice, but that's certainly not necessary. You want also to make sure that your soldering station's got some kind of a stand. This little tray here is for a sponge. You need to clean off your tip. So you'll wet a sponge and put it here. The sponge is not what I prefer to clean my tip. I like using the actual Brillo pad style ones, mainly because I don't want to have to keep dumping water onto my sponge. And plus the sponge will reduce the heat on your iron a bit. You get a bit of thermal shock. So I like these. Miles, catch up. So anyway, so that's the solder, that's cleaning your tip, and that's the soldering irons. Any questions? Again, you guys got to post questions if you've got them so that Miles can keep awake. A couple other tools that you're going to want to have, some flush cut pliers. You can see these are flat on the bottom. I think you can see that. So that you can get, when you trim off your leads, you get it nice and close to the board. You need a pair of these. You're going to need, if you're like any of the rest of us and you make a mistake, you're going to need some way to remove the solder. So there's a couple choices. This is a solder sucker. It's a little vacuum pump. You just push this down, you put it onto the joint, push the button, sucks it right up. These are really cool. This is what I like to use. There's also something called solder wick. And you just put that wick on top of this right here, this wick, on top of your bad joint, apply heat, it'll suck the solder out. So I think I have a link in there that's got a little kit, and it's got a spool of this and a solder sucker and a cheap pair of flush cut pliers. You can buy one of those cheap ones and then buy another pair of good ones, because you'll use these all the time. I love good flush cut pliers. So you're going to be needing to strip wires, and today we're going to start out with how to solder wires together, and then we're going to go into how to do boards. There's a couple different ways. You know, this is the style of wire strippers most people know how to do. And, you know, you put this on the end and you find the right hole maybe, and you clip it off and it strips your wire. The only thing I don't like about these, if this is connected to a control board and you put this on, you've got to pull on the strippers. And that's putting a lot of pressure on where this connects into your control board, and it's really easy to rip that out of your control board. So the style I prefer, I love these. I'll turn it around so you can see the name. I think I bought 3 or 4 of these as gifts to send these out. They're like 15 bucks. And the beauty of these, you can set the depth on how far you want it to strip. You just put the wire up into that until it touches it. No settings. It automatically figures it out. You just push down the handle. No stress on the wire, and your wire is stripped. What's good to do that up against my shirt? So this is the best investment, whether you're going to do soldering or not. If you have it to do any wiring work at all, I would definitely recommend getting one of these. And again, there's a lot of different models. I like the Capri. It does fairly small wires, and so it's the one. And for the 15 bucks, you can spend a lot more and get a better one, but this is 15 bucks well spent. So that's that. A couple other, did I get all my tools, Miles? Did I miss anything?
You did. There was a question, though. Some people want to know what kind of flex tube, what brand you use. We are going to post one here.
Of what? Of shrink tube?
Shrink tube.
I own a ton. In fact, right behind my monitor, I've got a PVC tube. Excuse this. A PVC tube with all different shrink tubes inside of it. Different sizes. Don't do that. Amazon has got a kit that's got like 8 or 10 different sizes. That's all black, but which is fine for what we do. Of shrink tube. That's what I do, and then I've just got it all organized in one of these. So that's what I use, and then you've got the right size shrink tube for whatever you need. There's nothing worse than being out of the size you need, but that's what I like for shrink tube. And we'll talk about shrink tube a little bit more for those of you that don't know what it is. Okay? Any other questions? Then devices? Did I do my other tools?
That's pretty much everything, I think.
Okay. We're going to talk about vices. There's a lot of ways. If you're doing wire, set of helping hands, and we'll show those here in a second. Really cheap. They're like $8, and you can just use that for holding boards too. I'm going to show a couple of my vices as well. A couple other things you may want to have. This is flux. You don't usually need flux because it's the rosin cores, the flux is in your solder. But sometimes if you're doing touch up and you want to add you may need to add some rosin. These pens are really good. You can get it in a bottle like this, but it's kind of a pain and messy. But these little pens are really nice. So this is what I use. I don't even remember if last time I used that bottle. You're going to want something to clean up possibly your board. It's going to leave some flux residue on the bottom. This flux remover works really well, and then some kind of a brush, non-conductive brush, to clean that off is really good. And if you forget to put the shrink tube on, has anybody done a wiring job, got a beautiful solder joint, and gone, son of a, I forgot to put the shrink tube on? Only Miles? Nobody else? Yeah, make sure to put the link for the wire stripper up there too. I don't know how many times I've done that now. Reheat it, rip the joint apart, put the solder or the shrink tube on, and then redo the joint. It's really good to have a can of this. This liquid electrical tape is so handy. You have to sit and let it dry because it's kind of messy. You kind of brush it on, it's liquid, and you brush it on. But this saves me more time than not. Or if I just come across something and I see that I've got a wire sticking out, or I want to cover a joint up, this stuff is really handy. So having a can of this around will save your butt too. And we talked about shrink tube. For those of you that don't know, you shrink tube when you do your wire and some of the other fittings that you may want to cover up. You can buy shrink tube in a variety of sizes. This just slides on, and then you heat it up with a lighter or a hot glue or a heat gun, and it just shrinks down. It forms a nice tight bond on there. Helps keep the water. It's not totally 100% waterproof, but it does keep most of the moisture out. So plus it seals up that joint, and you don't have a live joint there that can short out against something else. So you always want to cover that joint. You don't want that being able to contact anything else. So I'm looking at my table. I think I've talked about everything except for vices. This is something else I use a lot, and we're going to talk about blue tape. I love blue tape for doing boards, but we'll talk about that in a bit. Any questions? Come on, I need to take a drink. All right.
No question. Everybody's keeping up.
All right. One other thing, and this isn't really soldering, but I wanted to point this out. This is kind of cheating. If you need to repair a wire and you don't want to drag your soldering iron out, you don't have one of the little battery-powered ones, these little connectors are really cool. I thought they were pretty gimmicky, but I bought them anyway just to test them out, and they work pretty darn good. Get the biggest one out here. This is what they look like. And they've got a little bit of solder there in the middle. Then the little yellow bands are hot glue. And then the tube is shrink tube. You just put your wires together, join right there so that they join over the solder. You heat that up with a heat gun. It shrinks down the shrink tube, melts the hot glue, which seals it up, and then melts that low temp solder. These are pretty neat for an emergency to have in your kit.
And do we have a link for those?
Yeah, they should be in there.
What are they called?
I don't remember. Pain in the ass, yeah.
Well, I'll find the link and post it later, guys.
Yeah, I think it's in there. If not, I'll dig it out. But these, again, I found these on Amazon on one of my deep dives into Amazon. And did you find it? It is. They are.
I did not. What's it called?
Solder seal connectors. The first one, right under Hot Hackers. The fourth one down. So anyway, again, this isn't really soldering, but this will keep you from having to solder sometimes. You know, if you don't want to, can't for whatever reason.
It's good in a pinch too. If you're in the middle of your show and you don't have time to drag everything out, it's a quick fix.
Yep. I have them in my bag when I travel, and you know, I carry a bunch of animatronics, mine, and at Transworld we drag Miles' stuff out too, and it's nice to have these because again, it's a lot easier to heat these up with a lighter or something than have to drag out your soldering. Okay. All right. There's no questions on any of that. I'm going to just show you with this camera before I switch cameras. There is my old Radio Shack that still works. Oh, and I did want to talk about temp. This is a good reason. Between 300 and 350 degrees Celsius, 575 to 660, 665 is a good range of temperatures to use. I was taught that it's better to solder at higher temp and be on the joint for less time than to have your temperature set too low and risk being on a joint for too long and lifting a trace. So I normally solder at 660, right at the top end of that range, and it works really well for me. It's in and out really quick, so that's what I like to do. Okay, I don't know if there's any other questions on that, but let's get into the soldering. Miles, switch me off for a second. I'm going to switch cameras to the other camera, and we're going to actually solder.
All right, bear with us, guys, while we change cameras here. We're going to take another view, and keep in mind we're on about a 12-second delay, so we may be behind on answering those questions if you do post them. Brian, I think you're talking about, so Steve's solder gun has a line connected to the station. That station is the controller. That's where you set your heat settings, turn it off or on. Some of the guns, like the cheaper ones, of course, they have the dial and everything right on the gun itself. Steve's is separated out. We'll try to show that again at the end, Brian.
There we go.
Hopefully we're ready here. Okay.
So for the first thing, if you've never want to solder a PCB, and you may not, you still need to know how to solder wires together. And this is, this is a skill every hunter that's going to plug anything in needs to know how to do. And this, I said I would talk about a little bit. These are helping hands. They just have a couple little clips on the end, alligator clips on the ends for doing wires. Vices don't do a good job for holding wires. You want a pair of helping hands. And again, these are like $8. But they're really good and really handy. One thing I did with mine, they have really sharp little teeth on them. And when you use them for wires, for real thin wires, they'll put holes in your jacket. So what I did is put little pieces of shrink tube onto mine. They still grip really well and hold really well, but now they don't poke holes through the jackets of my wires. So so that's something. Again, those are called helping hands. Okay. So what you want to do is be able to integrate those two wires together. And you can start, you know, there's a couple easy ways to do this. Some people will just take their wire like this. They'll apply heat to it and then add some solder to it. And it's called tinning your wires. And then they'll just lay the two wires next to each other and heat the joint. And they'll join together. Certainly will work. And there's a lot of props out there built this way. Not my method of choice, but you know, that's certainly one choice. Another choice, again, I'm going to give you a couple options. These are not the ones that I usually use, but these are a couple options. Is that you can just kind of, when you're using multi-strand wire, and if you're looking to buy wire, for most of what we do, multi-strand wire is better. It's more flexible and less likely for the joints to break than solid wire. So I suggest that you get, you know, some wire in multiple sizes and get this stranded. But you can just take the two. Again, I can't watch the camera. Oh, forgot to talk about one thing, but we'll talk about it in a minute. Now that you can't see me, you can take these two wires and just kind of blend them together so they intertwine like that, and then solder them together. Okay? Or another option, and it's the one I prefer, is if you take these, and I've got a couple different colors so you can kind of see. What I do is I strip them, lay them in an X, and then wrap them around. I like a little bit of mechanical connection with mine. Like that, and solder them together. Miles, you've got your mic on.
Got it.
So that's the way I prefer to do it. Plus, it's a whole lot easier to lay them and get them straight in your vise and hold it together. So again, if you're doing these two wires just like this, what do you need to do before you attach the wires together? Anybody know? Anybody know? Hint? Put this on. Don't forget to put the shrink tube, because after we do this joint, if these wires are both connected to things on both ends, you need to put this on, scoot this shrink tube well away from your joint, because the heat is going to transfer down through this wire, and you don't want it shrinking your shrink tube back up here. So, try and get this back out of the way, and then after the joint cools, we're going to move that over here. So now the secret to soldering, if you're only going to watch one thing, and I've got to turn a fan on, one thing I think I'm going to talk about actually in a second. We'll talk about safety in a second, but I just turned my fan on. I don't have a solder fume extractor, but I do have a fan that blows across my workbench so that I don't breathe this stuff in. The secret to soldering, the one thing you need to know. Let me get some junk out of the way. Tools. Clean your tip. I usually add just a touch of solder. It helps with the heat transfer. And what the secret of soldering is you don't put solder onto your soldering iron and then try and paint it onto your joint. That's not going to work. What you do is you put your soldering iron on the back side, heat the joint up, and heat the wire until that starts to wick into there. And can you see that wicking in there? See how this is on the far side of the wire, or on the far side of the iron, and that's wicking into that joint and forming a solid joint. Okay? That's all there is to it. That's it. And that's the hard one to do. So again, You want to be, have to pull the heat towards the iron into whatever connection you're making, whether it's a wire or whether it's you know, something on a PCB. All right, did I go too fast? Did I skip something? Somebody want to see something again?
Try to show that one more time.
Without putting more solder on it. It's already got too much, but
that's fine.
Again, it's already got more solder on it than I usually would do it, but I'm trying to do it for the demo. But again, you're going to heat it from the far side. And again, if it's taking it a while, sometimes with wires, it helps put a little solder, pre-tin that tip. And then you see how I'm just feeding this in here? That's just wicking that solder right in there. Now it's got way too much. Don't anybody take a picture and put this on my Facebook page. My joints look better than that. Okay? Yeah, it really helps to tin the tip. I do. Yeah, Steve, I just fed a ton in there so that you could see it wicking in. That's like twice as much solder as it should, that it really needs. Again, you're not trying to paint this with or apply the solder from your soldering iron to the joint. The solder is coming from the other side of the joint and wicking in. But if you put a little bit of solder, just a dab onto your iron first, it helps with the thermal transfer, and it'll actually go faster. Oh, that's terrible. It'll actually heat up faster. There's no fixing that. That's embarrassing. Now you can't see that anymore. But it will help with the thermal transfer. And another thing, when you are done with your iron, make sure to tin the tip of it before you put it away and cool it down. Your tips are going to last longer. Okay? So that's how you do wires. And really, that is all there is to it. I know that was quick and easy and fast, but really it is quick and easy and fast. So I do want to talk a couple things before we go into soldering on the boards about safety. One, I wear glasses when I work and a magnifier. So make sure that you cover your eyes. Last thing you want to do is get solder in your hot solder in your eyes. So so please do that. Make sure to wash your hands when you're done. The last thing you want is this residue from soldering to be on your hands and transfer it to anything that you may be eating. And the soldering tips are really, really hot. So, you know, for those of you that know Alan Hops, and you know Alan always tests his heat gun by blowing it onto his hand, please do not do that with your soldering iron. Don't be touching, you know, your finger on there to see if your soldering iron is hot. Believe your temperature gauge on your soldering station.
Steve, Laura is asking, what kind of mat do you have under your work area there?
This is a mat that I got off of Amazon. I'll have to add a link. When we get done, I'll go find the link for it. It's not an anti-static mat, but it's really handy because it's got the embedded ruler in it. So a lot of times when I'm working on projects, I love being able to square up things on the grid and also have the ruler there. So it's really, really handy. Again, Tyler, I think, yes, you should always mechanically. I agree. That's why the third method I showed you is what I always do. I cross them. I mechanically twist those together. I don't like just the laying of tinned wires together and doing it. Even the intermeshed ones, that's not as mechanically sound as I like. So I really believe that you should. So totally agree. Okay. So did I do everything on safety? Did I cover everything? Glasses? Did I do all that? All right. So let's go on to soldering a board. This is the fun and easy stuff. A lot of people are really intimidated by doing boards. We've been doing boards for a long time. There's a bunch of us that make boards and make them available. This board that we're going to be looking at here, I get a lot of requests to do this one. This is the Banshee Junior board from Han Hackers that we use for our 3-axis skulls, 3-axis talking skulls. This includes the audio player on there, as well as controlling the random movement of a 3-axis skull. Steve has done, he helped me out on my Frankenstein board that was the precursor to this board. And then he's kind of taken this to the next level and made a wonderful board. But he sells the board, the bare PCB, he gives you a list of the parts, and he includes a few of the hard to get parts that you have to order separately to save on shipping, so that you don't have to order from 4 different manufacturers. And so he includes a few of the parts in there. Now, I've already done some of this, and as you can see, I have got it in a vise. This is my preferred way of working. I don't like using the helping hands on boards because sometimes it's hard to find spots to grab it by, and I don't like scraping up my boards, possibly damaging a trace. So this is one of the vices from Panavice, kind of the medium size. I own 3 of them actually. This is the medium one. This is the one that I use for smaller boards. Again, it's another Panavice. And then I've got a great big monster one that I use on the great big lighting boards, which most of you guys will never do. So, but if you don't want to use a vise, I know a lot of people just like putting the component in, putting the board flat onto their work surface and soldering there. Personally, my board ends up scooting across my bench and I end up chasing it with the soldering iron. I don't like that. I like it fully secured. So I prefer to use a vise. Now, I want to talk a little bit about components if you get into this. All these components, when I start soldering up a board, I start with the smallest, flattest components first and build up in size. And so the first round that I do is usually all the resistors and all the little tiny caps. And as far as resistors and capacitors, it does not matter which direction these go in. Now, if you look at mine all are lined up. All the gold bands on here, and you can tell the value of a resistor by the color bands, and there's a chart, you can check that out, but you don't need to know that. But all my gold bands go that way or they go that way. You don't have to do that. I just like it looks cleaner for me, and it's easier for me to look and see that I've got the right resistors in the right place. But it does not matter with a resistor or with these little caps. It doesn't matter. Some of the caps it does, but they'll have a plus or a minus on them, and you'll be able to see that. Now, one other thing, once you get all of those in, usually what I do is I put in the holders for the chips, and we don't solder the chips directly to the board because they're very heat sensitive, and if one of them gets damaged, it's, you have to cut it out and put the whole new one. This is nice. You put the these in, and then the chips set into here. They just put by spring action, they'll hold into here. These come with a little notch on the end of them, and your silk screen, you'll see on this one right here, the silk screen has got a little notch. So you put the notch and you line it up that way. If you put one of these in backwards, no fear. You don't have to take it out. If you put the notch down here at the back end on accident, just remember to put your chip in with the notch on the chip up here, okay? So you'll have to remember to do that, but you don't have to rip the whole thing out and redo it. So that's how that goes. Now, I've prepped a lot of this. This is what I'll do a lot of times, is I like to get an egg carton, and I will prep this stuff. A lot of times if I don't have a lot of time, and I'll put them in the order that they're going to go on the board, and I'll have this all prepped, because half the time you spend, or at least the half the time I spend, is looking for the right component. So if I've got a half an hour or something, 15 minutes, I can prep all of this, have it all ready to go. So when I sit down to solder, they're all ready to go. Now, you are going to want to bend these resistors, and you can be real anal about this and use a pair of pliers, and sometimes I do. But the way that Steve put this board together, the legs on these are just about as tight as they can get. So you just bend those down straight. And again, I've put them all in. And one thing I do use is a magnifier like this. You can see it. I'll show you later. So again, this is the last one to go in, and this goes right into this slot. And these are all labeled on the board where they go. So once you do this, when I'm doing a board, usually I'll put all the resistors and all the small caps on the first run, so that when I tip this over, there's going to be a whole sea of legs sticking up here. Now, you have a couple options. One of the real common options is to take these legs and just bend them over sideways like this to hold that component tight to the board. Well, the way I do it, where I may be doing 30, or 40 different components, that really gets to be a jungle, and it makes it hard for me to do it. So I leave them like this, and that's where the blue tape comes in. What I'll do is take a piece of this wide blue tape, and I will just stick it down over the top of the board, nice and tight. All my pieces are held down there, nice and tight. Now when I flip it over, I don't have to worry about it, and it's right there. Okay, so can everybody, let's see if we can get that joint nice and tight. So can everybody see that?
Looks good.
See those two little legs standing up there? I am going to show you how to do this. This is a little bit of technique here. It's a little bit of a dance, but what we are going to do, and again, I'm using a chisel tip, so it's, you would think, let's see if we can do this, one of these nice little fine tips would be really easy to get it into here and be able to touch both the pad and the leg there at the same time. The only problem is there's very little heat right here at this very tip. So what you end up, especially with bigger components, is having to get the side of the tip up here to get enough heat, and then you can't get around to touch the pad. So that's why I don't like those. I would much rather have a chisel tip. And what you're going to do, the secret to do all this soldering, is you need to put your soldering iron at the base, and you need to touch both the pad and the leg at the same time. So with this big chisel tip, you look at that, go, well, that's way too big to put on there. You put it up on the point, put it up against there, heat both of them up, just takes a second or two, feed the solder in from the other side just a little bit, and then pull the iron. That's it. That is all you have to do. That joint is done. It's perfect. And when they're done right, they'll be nice and shiny, and they'll be a little volcano. But that's all it is you come in with the iron for, again, something like this, just like a second. Then you bring in the solder from the opposing side, let it wick into that joint and through that hole, pull the solder back out, and then pull your iron out. We'll do another one. So again, in here, touch both, little bit of solder, pull that out, pull that out. That is it. You know how to do that. You know how to solder. And few other things, but for the most part, that's it. And then what you're going to do, again, if I've done them all, there's a whole sea of these, is take your flush cutters. We talked about these, the nice flat side down, one leg at a time. You don't want to be able to, you don't want to stress your components or your joints by taking like 3 or 4. And if you have a bunch here like this, it's really tempting to take 3 at a time or something. Don't do that. Hit them individually. Up against there, you don't want to cut any of that solder joint off, but tip it over just a little bit and take that out. Same thing in here, tip it a little bit, take it out, throw those away. That's it. All right. Questions?
Pat has a question.
Mm-hmm.
He wants to know do you use a heat sink on transistors or
Triax?
tracks? Yes.
Yes, usually. Again, depending on the design of the board, sometimes you don't need to, but they certainly have, that's why they've got the hole in the top of, I think I have a voltage regulator here. Give me a second. And so they've got that's a heat sink at the top, this voltage regulator. But that hole is there for a screw so that you can attach a heat sink to it. Screw the heat sink on there. But if in doubt, always put a heat sink on. That's kind of my feeling. Okay. Yes, good point there, Tyler. I have a tendency when I've got 40 or 50 of those to clip, is I will not grab the hold of it. I'll just hold the board and sit there and start snipping. And like a third of them end up not going into the trash can I'm holding it over. They fly all over the room, and then I have to go around with a magnet and pick them up. So yeah, don't be in a hurry like I did with those. Grab onto the leg, snip it. Otherwise, you'll snip that thing and it'll go 5 feet away. You'll find it in your bare feet, the next time you're walking around in bare feet. So I did leave for these. I've already, as you can see, when I put in these little sockets for the chips, this is what they look like. And there are the pins. Again, there's no electrical connection in here, so they don't care which way they're in, if they're in that way or if they're in this way, whether that tab lines up. So you don't really have to take them out, but you just got to make sure that the chip goes in the right way. So when I get these in, I usually will just anchor the two corners, and then I'll double check from the other side, make sure it's nice and flat, and then I'll come back and get the rest of them. Now with these two right here, I've just anchored those down, and I just kind of wanted to show you how fast this goes when you're doing these. So that I rest my wrist on back here, but everybody see? Into the joint. It's that fast. It's that fast. It's that easy to blow right down that whole line and get those done. Those are all great solder joints, okay? Any questions, thoughts, cooking recipes? Nope. All right, we'll continue on.
Nothing new.
All right, I wanted to talk a little bit more if you're going to get into components. We talked about the resistors and these little caps. It didn't matter which direction they went in, but there are some that it does matter which way they go in. And I wanted to talk about this little component that goes right here. You can see this little thing with a line and a diamond and a kind of a plus right there. That's for a diode. And diodes do care which direction they go in. And a diode is going to have a line on it. Can you see that line? That line right there. That line has to line up with the line on the board. Okay? I can't tell you how many people send me boards that don't work. They've blown out. Diodes are in wrong. So we talked a little bit about making these fit right. I've already laid that one over and at the hole to kind of see where it goes, and then I can kind of check out the other side, grab it with my pliers, bend it down so that I get that in the right spot.
So while you're doing this, Joe has a question. He wants to know, what is the difference between a Banshee Junior and a Banshee board?
Oh, good question.
Yes.
The Banshee Junior is what most people are going to want to use. The Banshee Junior is for a talking skull, 3-axis talking skull, single 3-axis talking skull. The idea behind the full Banshee is that it will do 2 skulls and be able to talk back and forth together. Unfortunately, Steve had some health issues and hasn't finished the programming. He's got a couple bugs on it that he's still working on finishing up. But most of us, it's the Banshee Junior. Don't, you know, if that's all you're going to do, don't pay for the extra parts and everything for the full-size Banshee. And then the wee little talker is just the talking circuit. So if all you want is a talking skull, then you only need the wee little talker, which is I think I have one right here, which is this. Programmed all the same way, 3 buttons, little audio player, but this is just the talking circuit.
So that would be for jaw movement only.
Mm-hmm. Okay. I want to talk about a couple other components. Most of the rest of them just go in the way that they show, but I want to talk about a couple things. When you're working with this package, the T220s packages, they've got the big heat sink on the back, that big silver one, and it goes right here. Now you see that white band right there? That's where the silver side goes. On there like that. Okay? Make sure you put it in that way. Miles and I just had one. Somebody sent him a board, 2 boards that didn't work. So he sent me pictures. They had one of their components, and it was a voltage regulator, was in backwards on both of them. So make sure that you get that in that direction. We talked about diodes. They've got to go with the stripe matching the picture on the board. Let's see, the other things. All of these. I want to talk a little bit about LEDs, getting LEDs to look decent on your board. The way I do LEDs, long leg goes to plus on the red LED, goes right like that. I like my LEDs nice and flush to the board. Even with this, or if you get that in there, what I do is only solder one of the legs in. And you can do this with other components as well. Again, in there, touch the pad, touch the leg, feed the solder in, pull it out, we're done. What I like to do is then come back and check, and you'll see that I've pushed that and it's not flush to the board. Easy to fix. Tip it over, put my finger up underneath it, apply a little bit of tension, heat that joint up till it pops in and rests flat, pull it out, it's nice and flat. Do the other leg. Okay? So that's that. You get the board all done. If you want, and again, it is a good idea to take some of this flux remover, take a non-static brush, scrub it a little bit, clean off the flux residue off of there. Good thing to do. And that's it. I mean, it's really, really oh, one more thing I did want to show you. This is a little trick. These are a pain in the butt. These are single pin headers. And Steve did a really nice thing by leaving these in nice big lines. Instead of putting them 3, 3, 3, 3, 3, he put them all in a nice row. So you just figure out how long you need it. And this is kind of like, and again, hold it with one side, especially if you're clipping off one of these, and then cut the other one, or else they will fly all over the room. You put that in there. These are almost impossible, even with tape, to hold these down so that they're straight. And it really bugs me when these are not straight. So what I'll do is, again, hold this down with some tape, put in one, attach one, and then pull it out and check and see if it's straight and level. It is, as you can see, I think you can see, it is not. So what you can do, hold it on the far end. These things will heat up that one till you can wiggle it, hold it until it's straight. Now it's nice and they're nice and straight on there. No, they're not. Do it again. Okay. All right. So that's that. All right. I tried to make this under an hour, and I see I went over a little bit. But really, that is all there is to it. Clean it up. Make sure to wash your hands when you're done. Make sure to add some solder to your tip, to your soldering iron before you put it away, and cool it down. And then test the board. Is Steve shipping? Yes, he is. He is back. He got the parts that he needed, and he's live again. I know he had Banshee Juniors and Wee Little Talkers back in stock.
Laura's asking how often you clean the tip up on your gun as you're working.
Every time it comes out of the stand, I'll clean it. I try and remember to do that. If I'm doing a whole bunch, like that first run on a Banshee board where I'm putting in, I don't know how many there are, 30 resistors and caps in that first run, I'll usually clean it at least once during that. It just makes it a lot easier. It keeps it neater. Your solder joints are better. And again, I prefer the Brillo pad style over the sponge. But that's personal preference.
And let's talk a little bit about the 3D printed board.
The what?
The 3D printed board.
Oh, the box. Oh, for those of you that are using a Banshee Junior, Steve has got, I don't know if you can see back here. This is the box that we get from Tata, and you actually take a Dremel and you kind of cut it out and make that fit over it. One of the guys made a 3D print, and it's on Thingiverse, so you can make it up, and your board just goes up sits it down on these pegs, and this screws down. It makes a nice solid covering. As you can see from mine, again, this is Vanna. Vanna travels with me to a lot of shows, and this lid is always coming off. And so I've got a Velcro strap on it, but I'll be replacing all of mine with that 3D printed one. So if you have a 3D printer, that's one way to make a little bit more cleaner install if you're using a Banshee Junior.
And let's talk a little bit about why it's important to put that in a case like that. What can happen, Steve?
These boards have got all the electrical connections on the back side, okay? All those are hot, for the most part. If something comes through that's metal, and that's one thing you want to make sure that your bench is nice and clean, because if you've got this powered up and you set this down on top of your pliers, you are going to let the blue smoke out of this board. And it is impossible to replace the blue smoke. They used to sell it in a can. Just kidding. They really did sell blue smoke in a can. As a joke, but once these are shot, you've got to usually replace components, and then it really gets to be a pain. So I was actually doing a seminar once, and they had me working big, huge, beautiful stainless steel tables, and I was setting things out, and somebody helped me by going in and plugging in my power strip with boards sitting straight onto the steel table. It was spectacular for 5 seconds. And then I was replacing a couple of the boards. So you want to be able to protect that. You also want to protect the components that are on top. Vanna, again, she travels with me a lot in a suitcase. She's been to Transworld 3 times, at least 3 times, and with me, to other conventions around the country. And last year, we get over to Miles. I usually stay with Miles when I'm there for Transworld. And we prep all the props the night before and got everything running. Everything was running super smoothly. And the last thing that I assembled was Vanna. And I go to plug her in, and it won't run, and it won't run, and it won't run, and it won't run. Can't figure out what's wrong with it. The SD card sticks out of the propeller activity board, which is not in a box yet, but it will be, right here, a tiny, tiny little bit. And somehow in transit, that SD card got cracked, a microscopic little crack. And needless to say, I did not have a spare. Now, if you can see right here, it says Vanna. There is another SD card right in there. Plus, it's on the cloud now. So anyway, so that you need to protect those so they don't short out and you don't damage any of your components. Any other questions? Any questions in general? Would you guys like to see something like this continue? I don't want to pay $20 a month for the streaming service if we're not going to use it. So kind of need to know if this is something you guys want to see. And if so, what kind of topics you would like to see covered, especially while we're locked inside. Again, anything on animatronics at all, you know, make sure to go over to my YouTube page. There's tons of tutorials, 100+ tutorials over there. If you haven't already joined our DIY animatronics group, I know a lot of you guys are on my personal page where this is broadcasting, but we also have a group for all of us. You know, my personal page is great for me, but we have the group so that all of us can participate. So make sure to go over there and join the group. What else? I have a book.
Be sure to check out the link down at the bottom there, DIYanimatronics.net. That's Steve's webpage that does have a lot of tutorials on it. You can see a lot of Steve's work and what he does. And you can also purchase the book through that website as well.
And yeah, if you're interested, do I have a book around here? I have one in the back. Adacore still got, as of this afternoon, had a couple copies left. And, you know, everybody charges the same price, but Adacore's got free shipping, so it saves you $9. So they had 2 copies left last time I saw. And I'm not bugging them because for those of you that have been following along, they are finishing up at this moment the recordable puppeteering board. So I've been working with them, the guys over there at Adacore. They are really cool to work with. If you didn't see the video, I think it's on my page. It is.
Yes, it is.
This is the first prototype of the recorder board. You use the controller, and you can build this controller yourself. They sell it as a kit. If you don't want to solder it, but you should be able to solder now. But if you don't want to solder this up, they'll do it for you for $20. Miles, did you solder your kit together?
I did not, but I had a prototype. I had a prototype that was already built.
Oh, that's right, you did. So anyway, but they're working on. They've got the boards right now. They're just finishing up the programming on it now. So we hope to see them any day now. So anyway, soldering iron, no guns. Soldering guns are for plumbing and for really huge, you know, connectors, which we don't do. I mean, battery cables and stuff like that. You can use a soldering gun. You just have to make sure, again, for electrical, do not use acid core solder. That's for plumbing. That'll ruin your electrical. You want rosin core. Again, I don't like the pencils. I use them. You know, you can get through with them, but I certainly don't do them. We've done them for soldering classes. Again, if you're going to do this, I would much rather have you buy this $15 or $20 soldering station that I showed at the beginning, that you can change the tip on so you can adjust the temperature, than use one of those soldering irons or the little pencil. I've got one of the really good Weller ones. it works, but again, I'd much rather have you have a station. My preferred temperature for most of the boards, I am soldering at 660 degrees, which is kind of at the top end, but I would prefer fast into the joint, fast off. If you leave heat on a joint too long, you can lift pads, and that really is a pain to try and fix. You have to use jumper wires to fix that for most of us. So I would rather use 660. You can use down 600 to 675 for temperature, and again, I have mine set at 660. Any other questions?
Somebody's asking about it.
Soldering, and that is another reason we did this. Soldering is a chapter in the book that I have been working on the sheltering in place. So that was why it was the perfect opportunity that to do this, to do it live. You know, this is so much better than reading in a book anyway. Again, just seeing how easy it is and seeing kind of that dance as you bring in the soldering iron, bring in the solder, pull the solder out, pull the soldering iron in. It's just, you get into that little rhythm and it is very quick. You know, you want to make sure you just want to add enough solder to get that little tiny volcano nice and shiny. If you find that you're getting like blobs of solder on, those are called cold solder joints, and you probably are not touching your iron onto the pad, so that solder blobs up onto the leg of your component and doesn't bond to the board. So you need, again, to make sure that the tip, and that's why those chisel tips are so nice, they transfer heat down to there at the tip so well. You have that corner of it sitting on top of the pad, the little round pad, get that chisel tip on there, and then lean it up against the leg of the component, and then feed that solder in from the other side. It'll wick right through. It'll wick through there, and you'll actually see a little bit of solder on the top of the board. Darren Attacor does, and I think that link that Miles put up was to buy the book from Attacor. Again, they had 2 copies left. You can, Amazon's got it as well, but again, they charge $8.95 for shipping. So, as do most Robot Shop, and everybody else does too. So, but Attacor offers free shipping. And again, if you guys are looking for some U.S. company to buy components from with customer service that you can get a hold of and that speaks English and returns your calls, the guys at Attacor are fabulous. That's why I chose to work with them. They're really, really quality guys to work with, and they don't carry everything, but if there's a component that you think they should carry, they'll add them for you. They're adding stuff for me. Laura, the only time I use a pointed tip is if I have got a very, very super crowded board, and for some reason I can't get in there with my chisel tip, or I am doing a super, super tiny pad that I just can't even get the tip of that chisel tip in. That is the only time I will use the pointy one. Again, that's what almost all the irons come with in the pencil style that you can't change, and you're stuck with it. Because again, there is so little heat down at that point right there that you've got to get back up here onto the body to be able to get any heat. And it's just really difficult. You end up trying to go straight in and then lean this up against the leg. So I really don't. I use, a small chisel tip is my favorite tip, and it's the one that I use 95% of the time. Even David knows this. We do the teensy eyes on the little teensy boards, and they are itty bitty tiny connectors. I still use my chisel tip, but for something like that, using a pointy tip would be nice. Okay. Any other questions? Again, doesn't have to be soldering at this point. I think we're done with soldering. Or we can be. Anybody got any problems? Anybody working on any projects they want to share? Or running into any problems on a project they're working on? Everybody's working on projects when they're locked at home, right? Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, David uses the pointy one for the teensies. I do when I remember, but usually I don't remember until the iron's heated up. And by then it's too late. And so it's like, I'll just use the chisel tip. Yeah, if you're doing super small joints, for when I do teensies, I have to solder those up before I have my coffee in the morning. Because any little bit of jitter will screw those joints up. So, but this is the magnifiers that I use. Again, I wear readers, but I still wear a pair of these to magnify that. And one other thing that I have that I really like, and we didn't use it here because it puts a halo on the board. But I'm going to change this around. This is an LED ring light with a magnifier inside of here. This thing, it comes in really handy. And this is the board, or what I usually use right over the top of my solder project that I'm working on. So that's what I like. Okay, I think that's it, guys. If we're done, thank you very much for joining in. Miles, you got anything to say to close up?
Nope, we're good. Appreciate everybody attending. We had a pretty good group tonight. This is something everybody's interested in. Several of you said it was. We'll try to do something again. So till next time, guys, we will see you later.
And thanks for joining us. Good luck. Happy hunting. Go make stuff.
That's all right.
All right. Good night, guys.